Hello and welcome to this Serial Geek TV episode commentary for Flowers for Hordak, an episode of She-Ra, Princess of Power, produced by Filmation Studios. I'm not quite sure where to begin with this episode, and don't you dare say at the start. It's because I feel like there's a great deal to talk about throughout this episode. I've conversed with people about this episode since the earliest days of the He-Man and She-Ra community, and I think based on those very same conversations, this Bob Forward pen script definitely falls into that love it or hate it category, although technically that in itself is surely two categories, but you know what I mean. Personally, I fall on the side of thoroughly loving this episode. At the same time, I can completely understand someone utterly hating this episode. And let's be honest, this is all because it centres around one particular character who actually proves to be rather divisive throughout all of her appearances. The Flower Maiden Perfumer. The script for this episode was approved on February the 22nd, 1985, and the final script revision was completed on April the 1st, 1985. April the 1st, somewhat oddly appropriate for this particular She-Ra story. As I said, this episode was produced in 1985 and aired that same year. However, She-Ra aired rather slow over here in the UK, and thus this episode didn't actually air on Children's ITV until, get ready for this, July the 16th, 1990. Yes, over a year after Filmation Studios had closed down. Now, as I've mentioned on numerous commentaries before, I didn't follow the She-Ra cartoon when it aired in the UK. I just only ever cared for when He-Man would appear. So I would say that the first time I saw this episode was around about mid to late 1996, during the earliest days of VHS tape trading, with Scott White sending me a plethora of He-Man and She-Ra episodes, some that I hadn't seen in over a decade, and in some cases, never seen before. And so yeah, nothing could truly prepare me for this episode. Also, we have to remember that Perfumer was a character kind of shoehorned into the first season right towards the end, alongside Flutterina, Mamista and Peekaboo. This is why the three of them show up in random cameos in the first season, if you watch them in the order the episodes were produced. And no, that's not the same as the production code order. It's also confusing. Also, this is why in the He-Man and She-Ra Christmas special, Flutterina, Mamista, Peekaboo and Perfumer have their powers showcased on screen. Yep, they were sort of being pushed by Mattel, but Filmation would only ever allow the pushing to go so far. The funny thing is, the second season gives Flutterina, Mamista and Peekaboo an episode each with them as the focal character, with Flutterina's being her actual origin. That one is a tad confusing continuity wise. But yeah, Bob Forward managed to squeeze Perfumer's episode into the very end of the first season, and what an episode this is. Certainly one of the most unforgettable ever. This episode's plot gets going immediately with Shadow Weaver revealing that she has acquired the Black Ruby, announcing that she wants to use it to cover the Whispering Woods in darkness, thereby killing the trees and ruining the rebels' defences. This is an excellent plot idea and one that we have seen elements of before. The Horde is desperate to get the rebels out of their protective environment, and this would become one of the main plot themes of the series. Flowers for Hordak follows in the tradition of episodes such as The Peril of Whispering Woods and King Miro's Journey, and the very memorable second season episode When Whispering Woods Last Bloomed, in showing the Horde trying to conquer the rebels' comfortable and reliable homestead. Actually, each of the aforementioned episodes have some of the more clever and interesting plots in the series, and Flowers for Hordak is no exception, as we shall see. There's a nice moment in this opening scene at the Fright Zone when Shadow Weaver announces that Perfumer is the only one who can foil their scheme, as her ability to empower Flora would mean that she could effortlessly keep the Whispering Woods very much alive. And here we are in the Crystal Falls, the home to Mamista. Yes, as I mentioned before, Mamista, one of the newer Princess of Power action figures, making one of her all too rare appearances in this very episode. She also prominently shows up in the season 1 episode Wild Child in what seems to be a random body of water, but here she appears in her more permanent home of the Crystal Falls. Speaking of which, this is the first episode that features the Crystal Falls, and, like numerous aspects of the She-Ra series, it looks nothing like the Mattel playset of the same name. Thinking about it, the Crystal Falls is so incredibly ripe with pretty foliage and vegetation that there is nothing really distinctive or memorable about it. It looks like any other area filled with dense flora. Mamista seems to be having fun with her two guests here, splashing Bo, with Adora admitting that she feels guilty about relaxing, which demonstrates how strong her work ethic is. And here she is, Perfumer. Once this character is introduced, everyone else recedes into the background. I'll let Perfumer speak for a few seconds because there's something I'd like to make mention of before this episode really gets going.
Make everything look so much nicer.
So firstly, yes, Erica Scheimer is the voice of Perfumer, and to be honest, it's a voice I forget that she performs from time to time. I always remember her roles as Queen Angela, Froster and Imp, but yeah, I often forget about the Flower Maiden. The interesting thing about her performance in this episode is that the voice is relatively fun and bright, but in the He-Man and She-Ra Christmas special, Erica voices Perfumer with a somewhat off-putting sing-song voice, and it's slightly jarring, at least for me. This here, for me, is the definitive Perfumer voice. The script actually dictates that the character is not dippy, simply ethereal, which is, I believe, what Erica manages to capture incredibly well with her performance, as does the overall episode itself. Going back to Perfumer's conversation with Adora and Bo, it's pretty much limited to her praising the value of flowers and how happy they make people. Obviously, Perfumer is obsessed with flora and pleasantness, and she seems a little strange to us. Adora and Bo's and even Mamista's glances prove that even they think Perfumer is a little kooky. At this point, we do not know if we are annoyed or engaged by Perfumer, but we, the audience, have already decided that whether good or bad, she will be unforgettable. And now the Princess of Power makes her appearance in the episode, but do not for 1 second think that she will be the star, as there are a couple of twists coming up that prevent that from being the case. Now, I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but it's easy to think that this will be yet another action-packed episode of She-Ra's first season. She-Ra, Bo and Mamista using their skills and abilities to take down some Horde troopers here. And when poor old Perfumer is captured, as we're soon about to bear witness to, we assume that another rescue mission is about to take place with She-Ra and her allies sneaking into the Fright Zone. But that is not going to happen. I think that's what makes this episode so good, in my opinion. It's uniqueness. I'm not sure how the others are completely oblivious to Perfumer being captured in the first place. Their reaction is almost, oh, there she goes. I really love this little moment here when Bo tries to figure out why the Horde want Perfumer. It goes some way into showing what the other rebels think of Perfumer, as if her abilities and her personality are entertaining but in no way a threat to the Horde. I mean, surely every rebel has been captured at some point during the first season, so their first reaction should be, well, it was bound to happen at some point. I love that the poor Horde trooper is destroyed just because Perfumer adorned him with some flowers. At first we think this is just a one-off gag, but
make sure that the prisoner Perfumer is placed in the darkest, dankest, dampest, dismalest dungeon we have.
This shot of Hordak is so energetic and perfectly acted by George DiCenzo. And speaking of George DiCenzo, he's an actor on She-Ra that I never really truly give enough credit to. We all know that his initial Hordak voice for the first 5 episodes of the series was incredibly cold and calculated, but as the series, much like the He-Man series, began to celebrate its main villain, the writers, animators and actor, in this case George DiCenzo, had a lot of fun with Hordak. And this episode, it really is a wonderful showcase for just how the actor could play the character so wonderfully devilish, but also hilariously frustrated and, as we shall see, at his wit's end. Now here, Shadow Weaver has cast her spell over the Whispering Woods, and sadly the visuals aren't all that great. Instead of an evil blanket of darkness sweeping over the woods, We get the typical Etherean night sky. It doesn't feel dramatic enough. The director could have learned a thing or two from the first season He-Man and the Masters of the Universe episode Eternal Darkness. That episode features an eclipse of Eternia's moon, and the resulting darkness is convincingly portrayed through underexposure of the film, resulting in characters actually looking like they are trapped in darkness, and it gives so much credence to the episode. She-Ra decides she needs help. Usually, She-Ra consults Lighthope in cases where she does not understand the problem, but in this instance, she already knows that the solution is to free Perfumer. Why does she actually need to see Lighthope when she already knows this? Well, it's mainly for this dramatic end to Act 1.
My magic says you should do nothing. Nothing at all.
She-Ra would of course head off to the Fright Zone to rescue Perfumer in yet another one of the series' Fright Zone rescue plots. This time, however, writer Bob Ford has a new and interesting spin on a very old story. Yes, the spiritual being of the Crystal Castle gives She-Ra some surprising news, telling her in an overdramatic tone that she should do nothing in her power to rescue Perfumer, and that the Flower Maiden should be left at the Fright Zone. Lighthope's message has a terrific effect on She-Ra and the structure of the episode going forward. Firstly, it keeps the Princess of Power from rescuing Perfumer prematurely, and secondly, it keeps her contained in the Whispering Woods. This means that the rebels must fight the darkness using only their limited powers, with no help from the outside world and no opportunity to even venture beyond the Whispering Woods. Lighthope's words of warning prevent She-Ra from solving the problem too quickly, allowing the story to develop in its naturally hilarious ways. And now we see Perfumer in a dungeon cell, though her abilities are wonderfully showcased here, with not only the cell being covered in beautiful flowers, but also, yes, Perfumer's ability to escape anytime she wants. I do love that. There's a part of me that wonders if Perfumer is one of those characters that we see in many a comic book or animated universe, a character with so much power that they're almost unstoppable, kind of like Marvel's Molecule Man, a man who has the power to do whatever he wants, but is very much an introvert who does not believe in himself, and thus the true level of his powers are rarely ever seen. In the case of Perfumer, she can make flowers appear out of nothing. When you think about what that ability could extend to, it's kind of scary. Goodness, this scene is just sublime. Yes, you can argue that it undermines the menace of the evil Horde, but look at Hordak.
Oh, do you want to dance? I hope you're better than your robots. They're sweet, but a little clumsy.
Furious, with Perfumer talking to him with not a care in the world. And of course, Hordakins, a name that probably haunts Hordak to this day. Perfumer comments on how sweet the Horde Troopers are, only enraging Hordak more. The Horde Troopers practically betray Hordak in this episode, falling under the charms of Perfumer. The troopers are clearly loving to sing and dance with Perfumer, and she is so forceful in her campaign of flowers that Hordak is almost powerless to stop her. As I said, she's pretty much unstoppable. And now we're about to see one of the best gags in the She-Ra series. I love this so much. Hordak transforms his head and the Horde Troopers look at one another in confusion. I mean, how did Bob Ford come up with that scene? Normally, a frustrated Hordak would just be that, frustrated. But the idea of him using his transformative abilities to turn his head into a mallet so that he can bang his head against the wall in frustration, it's just pure genius. And go back and look at those scenes of Hordak. Expressive would be an understatement. The animators go wild with Hordak's face. His furious red eyes bulge, his eyebrows squirm in pain, his mouth blazes with fire. Every movement of Hordak's face is full of fury and frustration. This is probably director Richard Trueblood's best work in the series. Hordak is on fire here, and all we can do is laugh. Perfumer's sugary, soothing qualities are perfectly juxtaposed against Hordak's boiling anger.
No! My wonderfully hideous fright zone ruined!
And back at the fright zone, poor Hordak, he doesn't know what to do as Perfumer leads a line of Horde troopers in a conga line dance. Now, the troopers are not just dancing with Perfumer, but they are also singing. They prance around the throne room, which is now engulfed in giant swallowing flowers. Hordak in the throne room, this should be his sanctuary, but he's almost grieving at the destruction of his dismal home, and we see that the Hordak we know and love is still very much there as he prepares to fire a blast at Perfumer. But guess what? Yep. Oh, this crossfade.
Now Hordak says he'll release Perfuma if someone will come take her away.
I love the absurdity of this, how utterly perplexed the rebels are by this rather dramatic turnaround. Hordak cannot deal with not only Perfuma's personality, but, as we have seen, her powers. Whereas She-Ra will fight Hordak to defeat him, Perfuma will just zap a little petunia on his shoulder and he will go crazy. Perfuma's personality is so overpowering and larger than life that even Etheria's greatest villain cannot stop her from spreading her euphoria. The entire Fright Zone surrenders to the Flower Maiden in an amazing reversal of power. It's wonderful. One wonders how Perfuma would do against Horde Prime, I dread to think. Years ago, actually, I stated that Perfuma was one of the most powerful Etherians, and people didn't believe me. I think if you watch this episode back and really understand what is going on, you can see that Perfuma has the ability to do whatever she wants. Yes, flower-based, but she can do whatever she wants. Actually, let me just wax lyrical about Perfuma for a second. It is so interesting how Filmation developed Perfuma's character for the animated series. Could have been developed in two ways. Firstly, she could have been portrayed as a nice, pleasant, gentle woman who enjoys flowers and wants to work for the side of good. This somewhat bland, generic treatment is the kind of nice girl personality given to a lot of the later She-Ra characters, including Flutterina, Natossa, Spinnerella and Sweet Bee. As much as I love those characters, one has to admit that from a personality standpoint, they're all a little cut and paste. Peekaboo is somewhat of an exception, as we see in the episode The Perils of Peekaboo. Whereas Filmation were kind of complacent with the later characters, they do get Perfuma right. They wisely take the second option and decide to exploit her flower powers and make them the foundation of the full-blown, over-the-top happiness flower maiden that Perfuma is. While everyone in the rebellion is nice, sometimes to the point of being banal, Perfuma proves that some kind people are just so enthusiastic that they are almost obnoxious. This character trait, of course, makes Perfuma a perfect foil for Hordak. Whereas Perfuma seems a little lost within the ranks of the rebels, she is perfectly at home in the dismal halls of the Fright Zone. There, she can be even more exaggerated than she is with her friends, so Perfuma really takes her act into overdrive. Here we have a nice little action scene, and at one point, She-Ra is even a little out of breath as she battles many a Horde trooper. Of course, the amusing thing about this scene is that Hordak, in his current situation, would not for 1 second want his Horde troopers attacking She-Ra.
Well, no one tells us anything.
I love that the Horde troopers complain that they're never told anything, something that we can actually believe. Now look at this animation of Hordak, marvellous. And She-Ra's expression too. Now the directing of this next shot is delightful as we see She-Ra's point of view and the exact moment the Princess of Power realises why Hordak wants rid of Perfuma. At this point, She-Ra is now aware how much Perfuma has put Hordak through. We see Perfuma has utterly covered the interior of the Fright Zone in flowers. Hordak demands that She-Ra take her friend away, but Perfuma actually protests. The Princess of Power is always at her best when she has the upper hand on her enemies and can make fun of them, especially with Melindy Britt delivering such wonderful dialogue.
Well, gee, I don't know, Hordakins. She says she wants to stay.
Here she is squeezing as much anguish out of Hordak as possible. I just love that visual, She-Ra with her arms crossed, and in the background one trooper with flowers around his head and the other trooper holding a bouquet of flowers. And so desperate is Hordak here that he not only promises to end the darkness spell, but also throw in the black ruby, the cause of all the distress, for good measure. And She-Ra's little triumphant wink to the audience, perfect. And here's where I'll begin my summary, starting with the ruthless leader of the evil Horde. Hordak's range of expressions are unparalleled in this episode. Few characters in the He-Man and She-Ra series receive as much great animation in one single episode as Hordak does here. The animator's brilliant work under the direction of Rich Trueblood rivals the expressions given to both He-Man and Froster in another Bob Ford script, Sweet Bee's Home. In fact, this episode and Sweet Bee's Home are in competition for the title of funniest He-Man and She-Ra episode ever, and I think Flowers for Hordak wins the prize. It is genuinely funny. Writer Bob Ford packs more humour into this script than in any other that was ever written for the series, a never-ending series of gags and jokes that all work perfectly. Most importantly of all, the hilarity is based on the show's character dynamics. Hordak is the real star of the show because all of the characters play off of him. Shadow Weaver, Mantenna, Perfumer and She-Ra are all funny in this episode because of how they interact with Hordak. Here's the typical leading bad guy who hates pretty things and gets mad when things do not go his way. But Flowers for Hordak gives the Horde leader some of his best material ever, allowing him to become enraged, get astronomically frustrated and beg in total desperation. Perfumer, of course, is a tour de force in this episode, and it is a good thing too because she hardly ever appears again. Her sweetness towards everything makes Hordak's life miserable. That said, had Perfumer made another starring role appearance in the series, it would be almost impossible to top Flowers for Hordak. This is one of those episodes that would appear in my top 10 list for She-Ra, and it's one of the few classics that is utterly humour based. The reason it succeeds so well as a funny episode is that all of the humour is concentrated on the characters. Bob Ford writes every character perfectly so that when they go against each other and collide, the audience erupts into laughter. The effervescent Perfumer is the perfect foil for the serious, ornery Hordak. Simply put, Flowers for Hordak is side-splitting greatness. And that's the end of this episode commentary. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.